welcome to Behind the Story with A.R. Simpson. I'm so glad you're here, and whether you're driving to work, tending the yard, feeding chickens, folding laundry, or simply enjoying a quiet moment, thank you for inviting me into your day. Let's spend some time together. I'm really glad you're here. If this is your first time listening, welcome. Here on Behind the Story, we begin every episode by reading a chapter from one of my books. Then together we go behind the story to discover the inspiration, the life lessons, and the faith that shaped it. Along the way, we'll also talk about writing, life on our little homestead, and hear stories of God's faithfulness from listeners just like you. So, every great story begins with a single page. Let's turn today's page together. Chapter 2. The Rule About Staying Close. Emma woke to birds. Not one bird, hundreds of them. Some chirped in quick bursts, others whistled long, musical notes that echoed through the trees. Somewhere nearby, a woodpecker hammered against a trunk with steady determination. For a moment, Emma forgot where she was. Then she opened her eyes and saw the curved ceiling of the tent. Camping. Pine Ridge. The mountains. A smile spread across her face. The morning sunlight filtered through the tent walls, turning the fabric gold. Outside, she could hear Dad moving around the campsite and the faint hiss of a camp stove. Then another smell reached her. Bacon. Emma sat up immediately. Now that was a proper way to wake up. Across from her, Lily was still buried deep inside her sleeping bag. Only a messy tangle of brown hair stuck out from the top. Emma nudged her with a foot. "Wake up." No response. "Breakfast." Nothing. Emma leaned closer. "Dad made bacon." Lily shot upright so fast she nearly smacked her head on the tent ceiling. "Why didn't you say that first?" Emma laughed. "I literally just did." Lily scrambled out of her sleeping bag. "Move." "You're welcome." Outside, the campground looked completely different in the daylight. The lake sparkled beneath the morning sun. Mist hovered just above the water, slowly drifting away as the day warmed. Dad stood beside the camp stove, flipping bacon in a cast iron skillet. Mom was pouring orange juice into plastic cups. The smell made Emma's stomach growl immediately. "Good morning, sleepyheads," Mom said. "Morning," Emma replied. "Bacon," Lily said reverently. Dad nodded. "Your priorities are impressive." Within minutes, everyone was gathered around the picnic table. Bacon, eggs, toast cooked over the camp stove, orange juice, the kind of breakfast that somehow tasted better outdoors. Lily took a huge bite and sighed dramatically. "This is the best breakfast I've ever had." "You said that last night about hot dogs," Emma pointed out. "That was the best dinner." "Oh, different category." Dad nodded. "Solid logic." After breakfast, the family cleaned up together. One thing Dad always insisted on while camping was leaving a campsite cleaner than they found it. "No crumbs," he reminded them. "Why?" Lily asked. "Because crumbs attract animals." "Like squirrels?" "Yes." "Like bears?" "Also yes." Lily immediately became much more interested in cleaning. A little later, Dad spread a campground map across the picnic table. "All right, team." Emma recognized that tone. Teaching tone. Dad loved teaching things, especially outdoors. "What's the lesson today?" Emma asked. Dad smiled. "Survival." Lily groaned. "Oh no." "What?" "Dad's survival lessons always turn into homework." "They do not." "They absolutely do." Mom hid a small smile behind her coffee mug. Dad ignored them both. "Question 1. Lily slumped dramatically. "See?" Dad pointed at the map. "If you got lost right now, what would you do?" Emma answered first. Stay where we are. Dad nodded. Good. Lily frowned. That sounds boring. It's also correct. But wouldn't we try to find our way back? Most people do. Dad looked serious now. And that's usually what gets them more lost. Emma thought about that. It actually made sense. Dad continued. If you're lost, remember 4 words. He wrote them on the back of a paper plate. Stop, think, observe, plan. Stop moving, he pointed to the first word. Think before you panic, the second. Observe your surroundings, the third. Make a plan, the fourth. Lily studied the plate. That's it? That's it. Seems easy. Dad laughed. It does. A pause. Until you're scared. The girls grew quiet, because even Lily understood that. Dad folded the map. Rule number 2. Emma grinned. There are multiple rules? There are always multiple rules, Lily sighed. Of course there are. Dad held up 2 fingers. Stay together. Emma nodded immediately. Easy. Dad pointed at her. You say that now. Then he pointed at Lily. But eventually, one person wants to stop. Lily. Or one person wants to keep exploring. Also Lily. Or one person thinks that they know a shortcut. Emma. Mom laughed. That is surprisingly accurate. Dad smiled. That's because I've met all of you. The morning passed with a short hike around the lake. Nothing difficult, just enough to enjoy the scenery. Emma walked beside Dad while Lily skipped ahead collecting pine cones. How many pine cones do you need? Emma called. Lily held up 5. More. For what? I don't know yet. Apparently, that was enough of an explanation. As they walked, Dad occasionally pointed things out. Animal tracks, different tree species, signs of an old storm damage. Emma enjoyed learning the details. It made the forest feel alive, not just pretty, interesting. At one point, Dad stopped beside a muddy patch near the trail. Who knows what this is? A set of hoof prints crossed the path. Lily immediately gasped. Deer! Dad nodded. Very good. Emma crouched beside the tracks. The prints looked surprisingly fresh. Were they here recently? Probably. Lily's eyes lit up. Can we follow them? Dad shook his head. No. Why? Because they're going where deer want to go. A pause. Not where people need to go. The answer struck with Emma. Longer than she expected. Later, after lunch, the family rented a small rowboat from the campground dock. The afternoon passed peacefully, fishing, laughing, enjoying the sunshine. Dad caught 2 fish. Mom caught 1. Emma caught none. Lily somehow managed to hook a submerged stick. Twice. It fought harder than your fish, she told Dad. Dad rolled his eyes. That stick nearly got away. Back at camp that evening, Emma sat near the fallen log while Mom prepared dinner. The woods beyond looked inviting in the fading sunlight. Her eyes drifted toward the narrow opening she had noticed yesterday, the almost trail, the secret path. It was easier to see now, a little clearer, a little more obvious, and somehow even more interesting. Thinking hard? Emma turned. Dad sat beside her. She pointed toward the opening. What is that? Dad followed her gaze. Deer trail. You can tell? Pretty easily. Emma studied it. Where does it go? Dad shrugged. Somewhere. Helpful. That's not an answer. It's technically an answer. Emma laughed, then looked back toward the trail. Have you ever wanted to follow it? Dad smiled. Of course. Did you? No. Why not? Dad rested his elbows on his knees. Because I wasn't supposed to. Emma stared at him. That actually stopped you? Sometimes. The grin that followed suggested otherwise. Mom called from camp. Michael, Dad laughed. Most of the time. For a moment, neither spoke. The woods seemed peaceful, harmless. Just trees, just shadows, just curiosity. Then Dad pointed toward the trail. You know what gets most people into trouble? Emma shook her head. They think they're only going a little farther. The words landed somewhere deep inside her. 1 extra minute. Dad held up a finger. 1 extra turn. Another finger. 1 quick look. A third finger. Most bad decisions start small. Emma stared at the trail. The opening between the trees looked no different than before. Yet suddenly, it felt important. Like it was waiting. Listening. That evening, after dinner and another campfire devotion, the family settled into their sleeping bags. Outside, wind whispered through the pines. Inside the tent, Lily was already half asleep. Emma? What? If I get lost someday, will you find me? Emma rolled her eyes. You ask weird questions. That's not a no. Emma smiled into the darkness. Yes. Promise? Yes. Lily relaxed immediately. Good. A moment later, she was asleep. Emma lay awake a little longer, listening to the sounds of the campground, thinking about Dad's survival lessons, thinking about the deer trail, thinking about the rule Dad kept repeating. Stay together, stay on the trail, don't go farther than you mean to. The advice seemed simple enough, almost obvious, which was probably why so many people ignored it. Outside, the forest waited silently beneath the stars, and somewhere beyond the fallen log, the deer trail wound deeper into the trees, waiting for someone curious enough to follow. That was chapter 2 of Lost Beneath the Pines. Now let's go behind the story. One of the things I wanted this chapter to do was quietly prepare readers for what's coming later in the story. On the surface, not a lot happens. The family wakes up to a beautiful morning in the mountains. They share breakfast together. Dad teaches a few camping and survival lessons. They hike around the lake. They enjoy a peaceful afternoon together. It almost feels like an ordinary camping trip. I actually went camping quite a bit when I was a kid with my family, and I loved it. I love those memories. And so I tried to put some of the feelings I remembered when we went camping into this story. So this was just, a normal day as a family camping. Very simple, basic things. But beneath the surface, something much bigger was taking shape. Throughout the chapter, Dad keeps repeating simple rules. Stay together, stay on the trail, stop, think, observe, plan. At first, they sound like camping rules. But the more I wrote this chapter, the more I realized they weren't just survival lessons, they were life lessons. Because how many times do we find ourselves thinking like, oh, just 1 extra minute. Oh, it's just like a little shortcut. Oh, let me take a quick look. It's just one small compromise. So one of my favorite lines in this chapter is when Dad says, most bad decisions start small. Because I think that's true for all of us. But I also believe the opposite can be true. Some of the best decisions start small too. Like choosing kindness when it's difficult, forgiving someone, encouraging a friend, opening your Bible, or praying before you start your day. That is something I just recently started being very conscious of. I wake up and honestly, my first instinct is to open my phone, pull it up, check the time, and then slowly let me just open Facebook real quick. I'm just gonna see if any of my friends have posted something, or let me check this one Facebook page or something. And before I know it, it's already been an hour, 2 hours, and I'm just scrolling. But before I even think to like thank God for the day or see if my children are awake, Um, so that's something I've been trying to do, and luckily it's been taking effect. I'll wake up and I think my first instinct is still like I'll open my phone, but I've noticed recently as soon as I'll see a Facebook post and it pops in my head. Oh, let's pray first. So I'll put it down, and it doesn't have to be anything long, just like a real short prayer, like thank you God for another day. Thank you for protecting me as I slept. Something really simple, and I've noticed that it has changed my days. My days have felt a little more peaceful. So those small choices repeated day after day can completely change the direction of our lives. So another thing I love about this chapter is that, dad isn't just teaching survival, he's preparing his daughters before they ever need the lesson. As I wrote that, it reminded me of how God often works in our own lives. Sometimes he teaches us something months or even years before we understand why. Then one day we find ourselves facing a difficult season, and suddenly we remember the lesson he planted in our hearts long before we even needed it. One verse that immediately comes to mind is Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Sometimes God's path isn't the easiest one. Sometimes it isn't the most exciting one, but it's always the safest place to walk because it's his path. It's what he made for us. And sometimes trusting him simply means choosing to take the next faithful step. So that was what was going on with this chapter. And now is behind the keyboard. Before we move on, I'd like to share a little bit about what I'm currently writing again. One of my favorite parts of being an author is that there's always another story waiting to be told. Right now, if you haven't listened to the episode 1, I did mention I'm working on Adrift Beyond the Horizon. That's the second book in my Faithful Trail adventure series. It follows Emma and Lily. When I first was coming up with this, I was thinking I wanted something where they're like lost at sea. And that's how I actually came up with the title, Adrift Beyond the Horizon. But I don't know, something just I couldn't settle on that. Like going off, being lost at sea. I was like, well, how is the dad going to teach him lessons? Like, unless he's ever been lost at sea. And then if he was, how would he not prevent that for his children? Like, I couldn't wrap my head around it. So this one is actually the sisters facing a powerful hurricane. And as the story unfolds, they're learning that, faith can give us hope, even in life's literally like the fiercest storms that we can face. So that's a little bit on book 2 in the Faithful Trail Adventure series. But I'm also working on a young adult fantasy novel called The Storms Know Her Name. This one's a little different from my middle grade books, the Christian books, but this one is a little bit more towards the young adult age group. And again, if you listen to episode 1, you know that it's not an explicitly Christian novel, but it's still a clean adventure story that actually deals with mermaids. As a kid, of course, I loved The Little Mermaid. Like, who didn't? And then also when I got a little older, does anyone remember the movie Aquamarine? I loved that movie. I watched it so many times, even as an adult, with all the streaming services we have. I could always find it and I still watch it from time to time. So I just loved that one, and I guess I just kind of loved mermaids in general. I think that's interesting. And so with this story, I just kind of wanted to be able to share a little bit of that love of mermaids. So that's what the second story is about. The second book or series that I'm working on. I don't want to give too much away. Um, so that's the second one. And, I really love writing stories that are different on the surface, but they share the same heart. And I think you'll be able to see that in both of these series that I'll slowly be bringing out. Both of them are these stories that they encourage us, to keep going, and stories that remind us that hope is never lost. So they're completely different stories. They don't have a lot of similarities, but I feel like the heart of it is still the same. And I've really enjoyed doing that. So I'll keep sharing updates as these books continue to grow, and I'm excited to bring you along the journey. So how about now we head around the homestead? I'd like to now tell you a little bit more about ours, because when people hear the word homestead, I feel like they often picture this huge farm with acres and acres of land. Well, ours is not like that. Although we are blessed that we still get to go and enjoy some of our spare time out on the 5 acres that we do have in another town where my husband's aunt still lives, and she has a few horses out there. So we do get to take time every now and then, just go and enjoy being out there. Our family is building our main little homestead here on about 1/3 of an acre. So some days everything goes according to plan. Feed and water the animals. Maybe put the dogs up that afternoon so the chickens can go out in free range, because our dogs were not raised with chickens. Dogs came first and then the chickens, so they're not very chicken friendly. So there are days where we make sure to put them away, make sure they're away from the chickens, and then we let the chickens out and enjoy some free time out. But then, there's other days the animals have ideas of their own, and we're just along for the ride. Our homestead here, it's definitely a work in progress. We have a long way to go. But one thing I hope you'll discover as this podcast grows is that some of my favorite stories, they do not come from my books. They come from gathering the eggs, watching our turkeys do something silly, or laughing at our dogs, or learning another lesson while working around the house, figuring out how something can work better. I feel like there's always a way to improve on something we're doing. So I think books take us on adventures, but the homestead reminds us to find joy in everyday life. But I think both are gifts from God. So let's move on to the last segment of the podcast, which is Behind Your Story. We're still just at the beginning of this, our journey here. So this is a reminder that I want this part of the podcast to reach into everyday miracles of you, the listeners. If you feel that desire in your heart to share an experience you had where God led you through something, or maybe you'd even like to share how you came to know Christ, you can email me at behindthestory@gmail.com. I'll also have the email listed in the episode's description, but you can send me your story and I can share it here. And you never know how your experience can maybe affect someone listening, and it could change their entire life. Because remember, God is still writing stories every single day. Here's our thought for the week. As you go through this week, I hope you'll remember this. One faithful step today can change the direction of tomorrow. Never underestimate what God can do through one small act of faith and obedience. Before we go, thank you for spending time with me If today's episode encouraged you, I'd be honored if you'd follow the podcast and leave a review. It really helps others discover the show and become part of this growing community we're trying to make. You can also follow me on all forms of social media. I will have them in the description. And again, if you'd like to share your story, don't forget you can email me at behindthestorywithar@gmail.com. Simply, just use the email listed in the episode's description as well. Whether your story feels extraordinary or wonderfully ordinary, it matters. Join me every Wednesday as we turn another page together. Remember, every chapter has meaning, every story matters, and God is still writing your story. God bless, and I'll see you next time on Behind the Story with A.R. Simpson.